In this video, I'll introduce you to the organs that make up the female reproductive system, and I'll describe their functions. Let's look at the outside of an adult female body. We can see the breasts that grow and change during puberty, and again during pregnancy, so they are ready to produce milk and feed a newborn baby. Unlike the male, you can't see many external reproductive organs around the female pelvis. We need to go inside the pelvis to see many of the female reproductive organs. They look like this. The female gonads are called ovaries. There are 2 ovaries located on either side of the pelvis. Each ovary is oval-shaped and slightly larger than an almond. The size of an ovary varies during each menstrual cycle, as well as during pregnancy. The ovaries are an important part of the female reproductive system. Ovaries produce eggs or oocytes, as well as the female sex hormones estrogen and progesterone. Each oocyte is just one single cell, and they are tiny compared to the eggs of some other species like chickens. All the oocytes a woman will ever have are present in her ovaries at birth. Oocytes only make up a small proportion of the ovaries. They also contain other cells that support the oocytes in their development. Usually just one egg grows to maturity each month. Only this mature egg is released from the ovary, and this process is called ovulation. After ovulation, the oocyte enters the oviduct, also known as the uterine tube or the fallopian tube. The oviduct connects the ovary to the uterus or womb. But the oviduct is not just a tube. It also provides nutrition, and it actively propels the oocyte into the uterus. Near each ovary, the oviduct expands to form a funnel-shaped infundibulum that partially covers the ovary. The end of the oviduct ends in finger-like projections called fimbriae. The function of the fimbriae and the infundibulum is to collect eggs that have been released from the ovary at ovulation, a bit like a hand catching a ball. The largest reproductive organ in the pelvis is the uterus. The uterus is a hollow, thick-walled organ that is shaped a little bit like an inverted pear. In a non-pregnant woman, it's about 7 centimetres long and 5 centimetres wide. The uterus is pretty amazing because during pregnancy its size increases dramatically as a baby grows and develops. The uterus has several layers of cells that allow it to contain and support a developing baby. The inner lining of the uterus is called the endometrium. The endometrium undergoes changes each month. These changes mean that after ovulation, the endometrium is ready to support the implantation and development of an embryo. If pregnancy doesn't occur, all but the base of the endometrium is shed during the woman's period, also called menstruation. The base of the endometrium remains attached to the muscle layer beneath. This muscle layer contracts during childbirth to help push the baby out of the uterus through the cervix and the vagina. The lowest narrow part of the uterus is called the cervix, and it projects into the vagina. The wall of the cervix contains many mucus-secreting glands. This mucus solidifies to form a thick plug at the opening from the cervix to the vagina. Why? Well, this plug is thought to act as a physical barrier that prevents disease-causing organisms or pathogens from travelling up the female reproductive tract from the vagina to the uterus. At ovulation, this mucus plug thins considerably to allow sperm to easily move through and into the uterus. Finally, there's the vagina. The vagina is a thick, 10 centimetre muscular tube that extends from the uterus to the outside. The vagina has 3 important functions. It's a passageway for menstrual secretions, it receives the penis during sex, and it's also the birth canal that delivers a baby from the uterus to the outside world. The female reproductive tract, the ovaries, oviducts, uterus and breasts is truly amazing. It not only produces oocytes, but hosts the process of fertilisation and then supports the development of new life from embryo to baby. Next, you'll be introduced to the structure and function of the organs that make up the male reproductive system. If you're a male, or if you've seen a male without any clothes on, then you probably think that the anatomy of the male reproductive system is, well, simple and obvious. Isn't everything important on display for all to see? But I'm here to tell you otherwise. The male reproductive system is actually complex and specialised. Some organs are indeed located externally for all to see, but others are hidden inside the body and less well known. In this video, you'll learn about the structure and function of all of the organs of the male reproductive system. Let's start with the function. The male reproductive system actually has 3 important functions. 1. To produce sperm and maintain sperm cells. A male produces 500 million sperm every day. 2. To transport sperm as well as support fluids to the female reproductive tract. This mixture of sperm and supporting fluid is known as semen. And 3. To secrete male sex hormones called androgens. The main androgen produced in males is testosterone. Structurally, the organs of the male reproductive system can be primary or secondary. The primary sex organs are a pair of testes. The testes hang within the scrotum, a fleshy sac located outside of the abdominal cavity. The testes make sperm cells and male sex hormones. The placement of the testes outside of the body might seem strange. Why are such important organs located in such a vulnerable position? But the reason is simple: temperature. Placing the testes outside of the body results in the temperature of the testes being 2 to 3 degrees Celsius lower than that of the rest of the body, and a lower temperature is required to make normal, healthy sperm. The secondary sex organs include internal ducts and accessory glands, as well as the external penis. The internal ducts are the epididymis, ductus deferens, ejaculatory duct and urethra. They store and transport sperm from the testes to the outside of the body. The accessory glands are the seminal vesicles, prostate and bulbourethral glands. They secrete various fluids into the ejaculatory duct and urethra. Most of the fluid in semen comes from these glands. The final secondary sex organ in the male is the penis. The penis is a tubular organ that has 2 main functions. 1. To carry urine to the exterior, and 2. To pass semen into the vagina during sexual intercourse. So, I hope you can see that the anatomy of the male reproductive system is anything but simple, and its functions are both essential and varied. We can't wait to help you learn more about this fascinating system.
You've been introduced to the main parts of the female reproductive systems. I'd like to talk to you about one of the problems that can arise within the female reproductive system, cervical cancer. You'll learn what cervical cancer is, how it's caused, and some of the ways it can be treated and prevented. But before we go too far, let's take a closer look at the cervix. The cervix is a cylinder-shaped neck of tissue that connects the vagina and the uterus. There are two portions that make up the cervix, the ectocervix and the endocervix. And the overlapping area between these regions is called the transformation zone, which is the zone where cancerous tumours most commonly arise. This area is lined with specialised cells called squamous epithelial cells, which are continually renewed during a female's life. Normally, these cells grow and multiply in an orderly way. However, in rare circumstances, the cells undergo changes and can become cancerous. So cancerous really means that the cells are dividing and growing in an unregulated, uncontrolled manner, and often there is a potential that this uncontrolled growth can spread to other parts of the body. Cervical cancer is the third most common cancer of the female reproductive tract. It's not as common as cancer of the endometrial lining of the uterus or ovarian cancer, but it is sadly responsible for around 5% of all cancer deaths in women. It most commonly occurs in women over the age of 35. Thankfully now, many countries offer widespread screening programs and targeted vaccines for early detection, which has led to reduced incidence and early detection of precancerous stages of the disease. The incidence of cervical cancer is higher in developing countries that do not have access to cervical screening and prevention programs. In those countries, cervical cancer remains the second most common type of cancer and cause of cancer deaths in women. So what actually causes cervical cancer? Well, in the largest proportion of cases, viruses actually do. These viruses are called human papillomaviruses, or HPV for short, and can be detected in almost all cases of cervical cancer. There are actually about 200 different types of HPV viruses. Some are not very dangerous and cause things like warts or cold sores. But some HPV viruses are much more risky and can be easily spread during direct sexual contact through the skin and mucous membranes of infected people to their partners. They can be spread by vaginal, anal, and oral sex. There are 50 genital HPV types. 15 are classified as high risk, and of these, types 16 and 18 account for the majority of HPV-related cancers in females. Some of the high-risk HPV infections can occur without any symptoms. They may go away within 1 to 2 years and do not cause cancer. However, some can persist and cause changes in the cervical lining that could ultimately lead to cancer. The risk factors that are related to HPV exposure include the early age of first intercourse, having multiple sex partners, having a high-risk sexual partner, for example, a partner that has multiple sexual partners or known HPV infection, a history of sexually transmitted infections, for example, chlamydia or genital herpes, and also if you have a disease like HIV that causes suppression of your immune system. There's also some evidence that cigarette smoking also increases the risk of getting cervical cancer. So you might be thinking that the best prevention against cervical cancer would be to never have sex with a man or a woman. Well, your risk would be very low, but luckily there are ways that you can reduce the risk of getting cervical cancer without going to such extremes. A very successful vaccine called Gardasil has been developed. Gardasil is directed against the strains of HPV known to cause cervical cancer. Australia was the first country to adopt a national, publicly funded HPV vaccination program, and now other countries are following. The original vaccine made protected against 2 of the high-risk HPV types, types 16 and 18, which cause 70% of the cervical cancers in women and 90% of all HPV-related cancers in men. It also protected against 2 low-risk HPV types, which cause 90% of genital warts. An updated vaccine called Gardasil 9 was launched recently, which provides fully vaccinated females with protection against 90% of cervical cancers because it protects them against all of the HPV strains in the original vaccine, as well as the next 5 most common HPV types found associated with cervical cancer. The Pap smear is a test that involves collecting cells from the cervix and examining them for abnormal changes. Often at the time of a Pap smear, an HPV detection test is also performed. This test determines whether the nucleic acids, the DNA and the RNA from the HPV virus are present. It is thought to be even more accurate than the traditional Pap smear test for detecting very early stages of the disease, and will likely soon replace the Pap smear for widespread screening purposes. In fact, in Australia, the Pap smear has now been replaced by the new cervical screening test, which looks specifically for HPV. The method of sample collection is the same, but whereas the Pap smear looked for the abnormal cells in the cervix, the new cervical screening test looks for HPV. Australian women will only need to be tested every 5 years instead of every 2, and testing doesn't begin until the woman is 25 years of age. The age used to be 18. The changes to the National Cervical Screening Program, in conjunction with the HPV vaccinations, are expected to reduce the number of women diagnosed with cervical cancer by at least 15%. If the cervical screening test is positive for HPV, the woman will straight away be referred for further tests or will be monitored and have a repeat test done in 12 months. This really depends on the type of HPV found and also whether the cervical cells have started to change. Often the early stages of cervical cancer don't have any symptoms and therefore can go undetected. Sometimes women may have irregular or heavy vaginal bleeding or bleeding after sexual intercourse. So again, this really highlights the importance of screening to detect any changes as early as possible. The new cervical screening tests can identify women at a higher risk of developing cervical cancer and also monitor or treat them to prevent cervical cancer occurring.
Balls, family jewels, gonads, nuts. That's right, we're talking testes, or testicles, which is yet another word that means the same thing. Here are 3 fun facts about the testes that you never realised you always wanted to know. 1. The left testicle hangs lower than the right one. Michelangelo and pretty much every sculptor in history were right. The left testicle does indeed hang lower than the right one. But why? The asymmetrical appearance of the testes has been well known for thousands of years, so plenty of theories have emerged. The ancient Greeks mistakenly believed that the left testicle was larger and heavier than the right one. They thought that the testes acted as weights that moved up and down to open and close semen ducts during ejaculation. One Greek philosopher also believed that each testicle gave rise to a different sex. Sperm, or seed as he called it, from the right testicle gave rise to a boy, whereas sperm from the left gave rise to girls. His theory persisted for a very long time. More than 2,000 years later, the book Essentials of Contraception, published in 1891, still recommended the use of elastic bands to help determine the sex of a baby. Ouch! Obviously, this isn't true. More recently, it has been suggested that the left testicle hangs lower in right-handed men, whereas the right testicle hangs lower in left-handed men. Some people have wondered whether the position of the testes might therefore be linked to the brain, because the brain determines whether you are right or left-handed. We now know that the position of the testes is in fact related to temperature regulation. The temperature of the testes needs to be lower than core body temperature for normal sperm production to occur. So hanging the testes at slightly different levels prevents them from pressing tightly against one another and overheating each other. Cooler testes make healthier, happier sperm. 2. Testes size varies. Buy any carton of eggs and you'll notice that despite what the packaging might say, not all eggs are the same size. Similarly, the testes vary in size in adult men. A normal adult testicle is about the size of a small egg. However, it's common for men to have different sized testes. It's also common for testes size to vary within the same man. In many men, the right testicle is in fact slightly larger than the left testicle. Many studies have shown that the testes size is positively correlated with sperm production. In other words, men with bigger testes tend to make more sperm, and men with a higher sperm count tend to have larger testes. The size of the testes can also increase by up to 50% during sexual arousal. This is because more blood flows to the testes during this period. In fact, a study by Masters and Johnson found that if sexual excitement is sustained for long enough, the testes can almost double in size, returning to normal after orgasm. But this ability for the testes to increase in size tends to taper off as men age. 3. Testes can disappear. Okay, not completely disappear, and not like magic, but they can quickly retract or elevate towards the abdomen. So it can sometimes look and feel like they're gone. Retraction of the testes is caused by contraction of the cremaster muscles. The cremaster muscles extend from the inguinal canal and surround each testicle. Contraction of the cremaster muscles lifts the testes up towards the pelvis, but relaxation of the cremaster muscles causes the testes to drop further down into the scrotum. When the testes are lifted closer to the pelvis, they are kept warm in a cold environment. And when they are dropped into the scrotum, they are cooled if the temperature rises. There are 2 other reasons why the cremaster muscles elevate the testes. Firstly, to lift them away from the scrotum and protect them from injury, although not usually fast enough to prevent pain. And secondly, just prior to ejaculation, the testes move towards the pelvis. This is thought to help create the full force required for ejaculation. Did you know that the cremaster muscle is an example of a skeletal muscle, which is a muscle that is under voluntary or conscious control, just like our biceps? Biceps contract. However, this is not the case for cremaster muscles. Even though the cremaster muscles are skeletal muscles, they have a mind of their own and they don't respond to your commands. Cremasters contract. Nothing. However, stroking the skin of the inner part of the thigh can cause the cremaster muscles to contract. This is called the cremasteric reflex, and it's most notable in children. So there you have it, 3 facts about testes. If you're curious to learn more, take a look at the summary I've prepared about the 10 things everyone should know about testicles.